Greetings. Thank you for tuning in to another program of the C.O.W.S. Hopefully it will be constructive information about racism, what it is and how it works, and what we can do to replace the system of racism with a system of justice as soon as possible. I hope folks were able to tune into the broadcast earlier today, Tuesday, May 4th, 2010. Dr. Jacqueline Battalora, I think she had excellent information about racism. I would highly encourage folks check out that program. Second program of the day, a non-white listener said that he had been talking to his father about racism, and I guess his father was mildly receptive. Didn't exactly tell him, shut up, stop talking to me about that, but wasn't exactly saying, you're right, there is a system of racism, we should be doing something about this. And the non-white male, his father, found an article that was written by our guest today. That article, When Are We, White People, Going to Get Over It? And his father read this article and texted him and said, wow, this white guy just wrote this article, and it sounds like you're right. There is a system of racism. Like, this is pretty incredible. And I found it funny, not surprising, just funny, because I've seen that consistently where a white person can come and say the exact same thing that a non-white person said, and just because the person is white, they will have much more credibility. Non-white people will put much more stock in what that white person has to say. So I found that interesting and thought it would be great if we could get that author to come chat with us and maybe get some more non-white people to understand that, yes, we are in a system of racism. Yes, white people are to blame, and yes, we all should be working very hard to try to correct this problem as soon as possible. He is an associate professor of history at Macon State College in Georgia. He is an award-winning author. Some of his books include Birmingham, Revolutionaries, also A Fire You Can't Put Out. He's written numerous essays. One of them, When Are We, White People, Going to Get Over It? If you have not read the article, it's linked in the description to this program. If you're listening at Blog Talk Radio, just click the title of that article and you can read it and see what we're chatting about on the program. He is a little under the weather, but he agreed to hang out with us anyway and share helpful information. We are glad to have him. Our guest, Dr. Andrew Manis. Dr. Manis, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Outstanding. Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Good.
Outstanding. Thank you for taking some of your Tuesday evening to come and speak with us.
Well, I'm delighted to do it.
Thank you. If you could, I guess for folks who may not be familiar with your work, if you could kind of give some of your background as to who you are and why you do this work.
I do this work for mostly religious reasons. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, as anyone can tell from my southern accent. I'm a Greek American. Both my parents were born in Greece. Excuse me, you'll hear a lot of the throat clearing tonight, I'm afraid. As I say, I grew up in Birmingham during the Civil Rights Movement, and this was in many ways the nerve center of the Civil Rights Movement. Certainly, the venue for one of the most significant victories of the Civil Rights Movement. But it wasn't a place to hear good things said about black people, most of what I heard was very negative. By the time I was 16, I got caught up in another movement called the Jesus Movement, and converted from Greek Orthodoxy and became a Baptist, and Southern Baptist at that. Intended to go into the pastoral ministry. I went to All my degrees are from Southern Baptist Institutions of Higher Learning, Samford University in Birmingham, where I majored in religion and history, and then I went to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky for 2 degrees, including a PhD in American religious history, where I focused on religion and the civil rights movement. And one of my books is essentially the publication of my dissertation. After that, after graduating, by the time I got into graduate school and working on the PhD, I sort of shifted my gears and decided that I felt more of a calling into teaching, and I had hoped to teach in a theological school somewhere. Didn't work out that way, but I did get pulled more and more into the study of African American history because my first teaching job was at Xavier University in New Orleans, the only historically black Catholic university in the Western Hemisphere. I was there for 3 years. And while I was there, decided to go on and do another book in civil rights matters, and it was at that time that I began working on what I think is my best book, the biography of Fred Shuttlesworth, the great civil rights leader from Birmingham. And so one thing led to another, writing books about religion and the civil rights movement, and this was something that I deeply believed in. I didn't always. I grew up in Birmingham listening to all the adults around me saying nasty things about black people. So you can't help hearing that and ingesting some of that. But somehow, perhaps it was my mother, who was a liberal and voted for LBJ in 1964, and that was unique because I was in the 4th grade at the time and almost got my butt kicked at school because, as usually happens in these presidential elections for 4th graders, they do their little mock elections, and all the kids vote for who their parents are going to vote for. And when I said I was going to vote for Johnson because my mother was going to vote for Johnson, the response of all of my classmates was, "Why are you going to vote for Johnson? Don't you know that he's for the niggers?" But nevertheless, my mom voted for Johnson, and I didn't know any better. The day after the election, I was the only one who was happy, and didn't know that you weren't supposed to gloat in a situation like that. That's when I almost got my butt kicked. I had a number of experiences along the way, but part of my education and part of my spiritual journey was discovering what I had suspected all along, was that Dr. King's version of Christianity was different from most of the Baptist preachers that plied their trade in Alabama. And when I got to college, I had a political science teacher who forced me to read Why We Can't Wait, and basically I got sort of converted again to an approach to Christianity that is closer to the black church than it is to most white churches. So it's just a combination of things related to where I got my first job out of graduate school, and what topics I chose to write about, and the more I wrote about these things, the deeper I got into it, and the deeper I came to believe in ways that most white people don't believe. So that's a long answer, and I'll try to keep them a little shorter than that from here on.
Okay. Very interesting. I definitely want to get more details about that and more of your views on the problem. Before we get into that, I did want to, I guess, check for our listeners who perhaps have not seen you. You are a white man, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. This program, the C.O.W.S, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. I use those two terms, racism and white supremacy, as synonyms, and the definition that I use for both terms is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
Well, I think a system like that exists. I'm not sure if it's global, because there are parts of the world that are not controlled by whites. But I do think I do think there's no question that there is such a system and has been such a system in the United States, and to the extent that the United States is the most powerful country in the world and it shapes so much of what else happens on this planet, then there is an element of what you think that I would agree with. Certainly, there has been a system, and without the system, without viewing it as a system, one of the things that and I certainly am not original in this. There are many others who say this, but certainly with my students, I make a distinction between prejudice and racism, and although racism has to have there is a sense of a superior race and an inferior races. That's component number one. Component number two is the idea that that the difference between the superior and the inferior races are biological and or genetic and unchangeable. And then the third component is, based on those first two ideas, to truly call it racism, you have to have enough power to create an entire social system designed to advantage the superiors and disadvantage the inferiors. That's certainly been the case in the United States. And so to that extent, I would agree with what you said.
I guess I had two things I would point out. I guess number one, I think quite a few of the guests that have been on the program have spoken about the next level of refinement of racism, white supremacy, being the so-called colorblind racism, and where a lot of white people, racist white supremacists, will say, you know, there's no such thing as race. That's a social construct. That's just some foolishness that people made up. They will say that is true, but still practice racism, white supremacy. So I'm not sure, or I don't believe that the biological component needs to be there. I think you have people who can practice racism, white people who can practice racism without believing in that biological component.
Well, that's right, and I would say you don't need the biological. But historically, it started with biological, and at least in terms of the way the way white Europeans pitched it, it started out being biological. So, as a historian, I sort of think in historical terms, but it's true that there's not any scientific basis for any biological difference, which has certainly been proven. So I would agree with you there too.
I wanted to go to my co-host. She has some questions as well, but I did want to ask, because you said you didn't think that all areas on the planet are under the control of white people who practice racism, white supremacy. Which areas are not under control of the most powerful white people on the planet?
Well, I don't think we control China. We may have certainly some influence over China. And certainly the most populous country in the world. I'm not prepared to split hairs about all the countries in the world. I'm certainly not educated enough to know everything about every nation. But I think it's certainly more along the lines of how I would argue it is to argue it from the point of view of the United States and the system that we have built and the society that we have built. And I'm all for the United States staying out of other people's business, although that's something that we don't do very much of. So how other countries deal with the issue of race, I have a concern for. But the burden of what I have tried to do is to say to people who are conservative religious types and who think primarily of the United States as a Christian nation, and there's an extent to which I don't agree with that statement, but I'll stipulate it for the sake of the people that I try to reach. And so most of the reasoning behind what I do is to say to people who believe, rightly or wrongly, that America was and should again be a Christian nation. Well, all right, I'll grant you that if that's the case. What would a Christian nation do on the issue of race? How would a Christian nation fix what it has damaged historically? And the Christian white folk in America have done very little to fix what we broke, and that's what I like to focus on, because most of the people I'm trying to convince are America First types, and in terms of the message I'm trying to get across to the people that I generally talk to, it's just the rest of the world is sort of outside of their universe, and I think that's tragic, but it's a reality. And so I try to say to them, okay, I'm just asking you what you think America is. If you think America has been and should be a Christian nation, what does a Christian nation do when it has committed an atrocity? And more than one over more than one century. And so I just think it's more helpful to keep focused on America, because for me, I'm not saying you can focus on what you want to, and it's a good argument to make, but I want to keep the people I'm trying to reach and the people I'm trying to change, whose minds I'm trying to change. they just get more confused if I bring the rest of the world into this equation. I want to focus on what America ought to be.
Thank you for clarification. Appreciate that. My co-host, she is here. She is all of 11, but she is very interested in learning about racism, white supremacy, and she should have a few questions. Justice, if you are here, please go right ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Is this a white... I missed the first part of the show. Is this a white person or a non-white person?
I'm a white person.
Okay. I'm just listening for now. I'm out and about doing some stuff, so I don't have any questions right now, but I'm listening.
Okay. Well, great. Anytime you have a question, just interrupt.
Okay.
Great. That's great. Okay.
I'll make sure to do that.
Okay.
Right on. Okie dokie. I guess, what you said, the work, I guess I'll ask first. You said that the people that you try to reach in terms of asking, if this is a so-called Christian nation, what would a Christian nation do to correct atrocities that nation has committed? Who are you talking to? Are you talking to white people when you have these conversations?
I have conversations with my students from time to time. I teach a number of courses in which subjects like this come up, and when they come up, and I bring them up often, though not every time I teach certain classes, but if you spend any time in Georgia or the Deep South, you know how red our states down here are, and a part of their attachment to the Republican Party, which of course is only one generation old, because of course the South used to be solidly Democratic. But really two things have led the South, or white Southern voters, to gravitate to the Republican Party, and one was when they began to forsake their reputation as the party of Lincoln and became the party of Goldwater, Nixon, and Reagan, in what everybody knows is called. In fact, Michael Steele, the chair of the Republican National Committee, recently admitted that the Republican Party has a long history of playing the race card, or engaging in what was called the Southern Strategy, and that's essentially an attempt to appeal to the racial resentments of Southerners. But what they didn't know at the time was that, or what they tried to obfuscate was that that strategy would work everywhere in America, almost everywhere in America, and not just in the South. So
I'm sorry, could I toss in really quick? I think it's very important to be accurate with terms. Would it be more accurate, as opposed to saying the race card, would it be accurate to say the strategy is to practice and appeal to racism, white supremacy? Would that be more accurate?
Well, in a sense, it would be. It wouldn't be, because it's camouflage. It's part of this colorblindness thing that you mentioned a while ago. The Republican Party has actually, they learned this from George Wallace, and that is they learned that the message after 1964 and 65, you couldn't do politics in the old Southern way and actually use the N-word and specifically make references to, if you vote this way, you'll be giving too much to African Americans. So they figured out a way, and Goldwater actually started it by opposing the Civil Rights Act of '64 during his run for the presidency, and saying, of course, that he was doing it because of constitutional principles. And Wallace picked that up, and then in '64 and then in '68. This is the man who had said when he lost the Alabama governor's race in 1958 that he would never be N-worded again in an election because his opponent had appealed to race much more directly than he had, and he learned from that. And in 1962, he specifically was running as the candidate who would stop integration in Alabama. But when he ran for president in 1968, he didn't use, the N-word or the S-word segregation, but he could use code words. He could refer to crime in the streets. But he could refer to riots, and he could in essence talk about race without specifically talking about race. And that Southern politicians had learned that after the Civil War. That's how they disfranchised African Americans after Reconstruction. They didn't say we're gonna pass laws that keep people from voting if they're black. They said, we'll use codes. We'll eliminate voters who can't read or can't understand parts of the Constitution, or don't have grandfathers who voted, or those. So in essence, those were code words too, and so the Republican Party has appealed to the racial resentments of white Americans, not just Southerners. And that's one way they converted the South from solidly Democratic to solidly Republican. The other way they did it was to attach to this, the idea that they were the party that stood up for the Christian values of American history and culture, whereas the Democratic Party was the more rainbow coalition kind of party, and you can see that in the makeup of the different conventions. If you watch a Republican convention, the percentage of non-white faces in the audience is very low. The percentage of non-white faces at the podium is a lot higher, and but it's the way of saying, hey, we're colorblind. We quote Martin Luther King now. We believe Dr. King was right when he said, I have a dream of a day when my little children will be judged by the content of the character instead of the color of their skin. Of course, they don't mention the fact that Dr. King believed in affirmative action, and Dr. King believed in a lot of things that they don't believe in, but they quote him in the way that... So those two things, really. The Republican Party has appealed to race and has appealed to the Christian roots of America in terms of culture, and with those two weapons, they have been able to in pretty short order, convert the South from solidly blue to solidly red. And but as I say, this was a strategy that has not only worked in the South, it has worked in the Midwest, and in in parts of the whole country. Now, the Northeast, not the Northeast, but the far West tends to be the most secular region of the country. Seattle, Washington, in that area is by a number of polls have shown that the Great Northwest is really the most secular part of America, with the exception of maybe New York City and Los Angeles, in terms of those bi-coastal places. But at any rate, this sort of twofold strategy has been very successful, as since 1980, and what that strategy may do in the next 2 years is anybody's guess. At this point, I'm still confident that by 2012 the economy will be better, or at least I'm hoping it'll be better. And though President Obama may have a long night on election night this November, I think he'll be okay 2 years later.
What has your experience been when you talk to white people about the problem of racism? Are they receptive? Do they seem eager to go out and help you in solving this problem?
No, they don't seem eager to. They think, largely they think I'm smoking something. But you do what you can do. I wish I could say that I'm optimistic that I'll be able to convert a lot of people to my point of view. I'm not terribly optimistic about that, but I have a sense of calling about it, and I don't mind saying there's a sort of religious element to it, and so my plan is to keep on tossing these grenades into classrooms. My classrooms are not totally white. I teach at Macon State College in Macon, Georgia, and about 35% of the students at our place are African Americans. Maybe more than that, maybe close to 40%. But I have, at the same time, I'll tell you this story that after the piece that you've referred to appeared in our local paper, it didn't really get that much attention locally. Part of the reason why it didn't was because the editor of the local paper here, who's African American, cut it down and edited it for space. And at the end of that essay, there's this little 3-point plan, you'll recall. And but my friend Charles Richardson, the editor at the Macon Telegraph, cut that 3-point plan out. So it didn't have quite the punch locally that it did when it began to be forwarded by emailers. And so I never expected that this thing would go viral like it has. But a day or so after the easier version appeared in the local paper, somebody wrote in and said that after reading Mannis's op-ed piece, it was clear that Macon State had a certified lunatic on its faculty. And if
wow,
I mean, that's about the, and I thought, geez, all I thought I really was doing was saying we ought not talk about killing a new president, just because of whatever reasons someone might not like the fact that he's president, if that's being a lunatic, I'm happy to be crazy. But the other thing that the other point that has been raised, some of the I noticed on one of the blogs that is attached to your website, some of the bloggers, and this is true pretty much in any of the blogs where they have responded to this piece, I get accused of being a person wallowing in white guilt, and so I get that a lot. But I enjoy being a little bit of a gadfly on this matter, and occasionally someone comes over to my side.
Just, I guess, from the piece that you're talking about, when are we white people going to get over it? As I say, it's linked in the description for this program, so anybody, if you're listening at Blog Talk Radio, you can just click that and you can read the piece. If you could kind of, I guess, give a brief feeling of what you wrote about in that piece, and then, I guess, to answer the question, perhaps, when are white people going to discontinue practicing racism, white supremacy?
Well, what I did in this piece was it was originally written 2 Sundays after the 2008 election, and of course we all know from the campaign that there were any number of stories that that indicated that the Secret Service was fielding a lot more threats on the life of candidate Obama than was normally the case for presidential candidates. And early in the campaign, there's any number of articles that I read where African Americans said they were sort of reluctant to vote for Obama because they were afraid that if he got elected president, that he wouldn't survive it, and that someone would, with our history of racial violence in America and political assassinations, that anyway. So we all know that there was a lot of that going on during the campaign, and it bled over, of course, into the post-campaign or post-election. And this article was an Associated Press article that appeared in, I assume, hundreds of newspapers across the country on Sunday, November, I think it was 18th, 2008. It was, I think, on the front page or page 2 in the Macon Telegraph. Sunday morning, I open the paper and I read this thing, and it's talking about all of the racial, threats that had been heard by somebody. It talked about, it quoted some school kids in the Atlanta area saying that they hoped President-elect Obama would get assassinated, and it gave several examples like that. And as I read this, I just frankly got very angry, and it reminded me of all of the negative things that I heard said about King and John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy growing up in Birmingham. And since it was clear that all three of those people were assassinated in the 60s, it just struck me as a particularly dangerous situation. And so I just sat down, wrote a few lines of it before church, then went to church, then came back and wrote the rest of it. By Sunday night, I had written it, and basically it's just, a part of the criticism I've gotten is that I lump all whites together. Well, there are recovering racists among whites, and that's what I think I am.
What is a recovering racist?
Well, someone who recognizes that it was a part of their belief system, or at least a part of the belief system of the people who brought them into the world and nurtured them and taught them the ropes and socialized them. I don't think it's possible to grow up in America and not be damaged by racism. And I think that's true of white people, and I think it's true of non-white people. And so it doesn't affect non-whites in the same way, but it does do damage, and then sometimes it does do. There's certainly lots of black people who buy into some standard white arguments about these things. You mentioned that early on in your introduction. So I think, I think that there is, because this country has been constituted, has been set up in a way to elevate white and denigrate black. And, anything in between is by degrees inferior or superior, depending on how close it is to white or how close it is to black. That's the way this has been set up. And so, when you come into the world and your parents and all the adults and all the authority figures share these ideas, you get the disease. And I think that so I would be willing to say I have been a racist. I recognize it as a problem, but I also recognize that it has done damage to me. And this is an idea that's been around this long and has been this powerful in shaping the social system of a country like the United States. Has done untold amounts of damage on everybody who has been born into it. It's like being born in a house, where there's asbestos in the walls or in the ceilings. You're gonna breathe some of that stuff, and that stuff is going to have a negative effect on you. I was Archbishop Desmond Tutu tells a story, and this is I think, one of the most powerful stories I think I've ever heard along these lines in terms of underscoring the power of racism and the damage it does without people knowing that it's damaging their psyche, even when they consciously fight it. Archbishop Tutu was telling a reporter about an incident earlier in his career. He was working for the National Council of Churches, and he was going from South Africa to Nigeria. And he boarded this plane, and it became clear that the two pilots were black. And he had never been on a plane where the pilots were black. And so he was sort of celebrating the fact that, they've been told all these years that blacks were not capable of being pilots, and here was the evidence to the contrary. You have two black pilots in the cockpit. So he congratulates them, and he's feeling rather celebratory about this. They buckle in, they take off. A little while later, they're en route. And Archbishop Tutu says they ran into the mother of all turbulence. And he said it was extremely frightening. Everybody was fearful for their lives, including himself. And he said, that completely unbidden, the thought came to his mind, there's no white guys in the cockpit. I hope those black pilots know what they're doing. Now this is someone who's dedicated his life to eradicating apartheid and did a reasonably good job in helping that happen. Here's a person who has felt the sting of racism, and yet it's almost reflexive that turbulence, frightening as it was, the thought comes into Archbishop Tutu's mind that maybe they'd be safer if they had white pilots in the cockpit. And I've never heard a story that more that more completely explains the power that racism has, not just over white people, but African Americans or persons of African descent as well. And so I would say that anybody who's born in America, grown up in America, is infected with this. And to that extent, maybe we're all recovering racists. Or
non-white people too?
Well, non-white people may not be recovering racists, but they certainly are recovering, to varying degrees, of course, recovering from the effects of racism.
All right. This is where I wanted to, when I talk about clarity, where I think people say that I'm being tough on white people who say that they are against racism. I feel it's very important to use the most accurate terms possible to describe what's happening under racism, white supremacy. I definitely would say for non-white people, I think the system of white supremacy is ongoing. I don't think the recovery process can begin until the victimization has stopped. So I think non-white people, including myself, I'm a black male, I think it would be most accurate to say that we are victims of white supremacy. I am still mistreated every day because I am not white. I think for white people, I'll ask the question, you are a white person. You said everyone, all white people, you're trained, subjected to racism, white supremacy. You're trained, you learn it, it's everywhere, you absorb it. Do you think it's accurate to say that if you are a white person, as long as the system of white supremacy exists, you are going to be trained to practice and carry out racism, white supremacy? I
think you can co-opt that. I think you can overcome that to some extent. I think because most...
that means...
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, that means if you're a white person, are you saying it is possible to be a white person under the system of white supremacy and not practice racism?
I think well, this is where philosophically it becomes tough, because there's I would say because of the way social networks are, most white people live in a white world, and there's some areas of their life where we compromise with racism, look the other way, and we consciously we try. Consciously, I try to not be shaped by it, and not be affected by it. But that's why I'm willing to say a recovering racist. In the same way, perhaps that, and I don't know if these analogies always work. Every analogy breaks down ultimately in some way. But a recovering alcoholic has to, do it one day at a time and try to deal with the effects of that which has infected or affected his life negatively. And so, do I think that there are any white people who have completely escaped racism? No, I don't. But I do think, and I think it's clear that there have always been a minority of whites who understood what justice was, and were able to swim against the stream to some extent, not necessarily in every aspect of their lives, but the Black freedom struggle has had white allies. It hasn't had enough. But it's clear that there have been whites who, to some extent, have been able to transcend the racism that has affected them, and I hope to be one of those people. But I'm not.
I guess this would be.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I guess this would be why I'm hard on white so-called anti-racists. There have been white people, John Brown, his name is brought up a lot on this program, and others, who have assisted non-white people who have done work against racism, white supremacy. I think it's accurate. I think it's 100% accurate and valid to say those white people are not representative of the general population of white people on the planet or this area of the world. I think in statistics, it would be said
that it's a small remnant. I have had a professor in seminary who said they were one of the wonderful things about studying history is that you meet what he used to call horizontal people, people who could see beyond the horizon, and were ahead of their time. and did not submit to the conventional wisdom. And usually there were people who were, like John Brown, thought of as insane or weird or strange in some way or another. And yet, 100 years later, it turns out that they were on the right side of history, and the people who called them crazy were on the wrong side of history. And so, you know, I don't think John Brown completely overcame racism.
Not even close. Not even close.
But
not even close.
You know, he. I mean, in his own life, in his own biographical life, you know.
Not even close.
But he was certainly farther along. I mean, you know, at a time when white people didn't even bother to learn the first names of black people, or refused to allow blacks to be called Mr. or Mrs. John Brown was calling them by their first name, allowing them to call him by his first name, and eating at the same table with them. That's the definition of a horizontal person. He was ahead of his time.
He did not solve the problem of racism, white supremacy. I guess what I would say, because I hear a lot of white people speak about John Brown, and I think it's very important. Non-white people are confused about racism, white supremacy. I think it would be far more constructive, as opposed to pointing out these few and far between white people who did work against racism, white supremacy, to really highlight these people are exceptions to the rule. White people, all of us, are trained to be racist, white supremacists. It's unavoidable in this system. The John Browns, these people are not statistically significant. I believe you do sociology, they have that concept where you look at something and you want to see, is this statistically significant? Statistically significant. These so-called white allies, they are not statistically significant. The overwhelming number of white people continue to be happy participants in the system of white supremacy, and, you know, calling you crazy for writing an article saying we should be, you know, upset about these death threats at President Obama. I think that would be very helpful, and I don't hear white people who say they're against racism speak honestly about that. When terms are used like recovering racists, I feel like we're not speaking honestly. We're not telling the truth about, hey, I'm racist too. I try to work against it, but hey, I'm white. I've been conditioned just like every other white person, and even though I try, I'm most likely still practicing racism every day in ways I am aware of, and probably a lot of ways I'm not even aware of.
Well, that's true, but there's still a difference between sort of the kind of racism that was deliberate and conscious. I mean, I can say, in terms of directly. Now, indirectly, in terms of, you know, allowing things to exist, and, you know, not being on a street corner every day, saying that we're a racist society, if that's what it takes, then I'm not there. But neither am I at a place where I consciously mistreat someone because they're not white. And I emphasize consciously. There may be times when I do something unconscious.
You suspect that that's happened?
Say again?
Do you suspect that that's happened, that you are mistreating individuals because they are not white unconsciously?
No, I don't think so. But you know, I can't say that absolutely because it's unconscious. And if it's unconscious, then I'm not conscious of it. And so, you know, but I do know that consciously, I go out of my way to be even-handed in personal relationships, and in terms of what I teach in my classroom and what I teach from pulpits when I get the opportunity to preach in churches, and when in my writings, I have tried to be a voice that says we are racist and we hadn't done anything to fix that. And
do you tell non-white people? You tell non-white people that?
Tell non-white people what?
That we white people are racist and we have not done anything to correct that.
Yes, of course I do. I probably do that every week at some point or another, by implication or by direct statement. Yes, you know, and that's clear from what I've tried to emphasize is, and as I said earlier, as a person who is a Christian, and talking to people who profess to be Christians, I mean, there's any number of ways in which most American Christians don't have the slightest idea what it really means to follow Jesus of Nazareth in his sort of radical reversal of human standards. And I mean, you know, in America, we most American Christians think that Uncle Sam is part of the Trinity, and that you know, if the United States has done it, it must be Christian, and that sort of thing, and so that all of these wars that we start and have started, they're all justified in some way, and so, you know, when it comes to peacemaking and when it comes to economic justice, when it comes to racial justice, I think most American Christians are much more well, I think it'd be more accurate to call them Christian Americans, because they're more American than they are Christian, in the sense that they don't seem to understand the radical nature of what Jesus taught. And if they did, and if they took that seriously, you know, I think, for example, we wouldn't be supporting an immigration law such as they have in Arizona. We wouldn't be so eager to involve ourselves in war making. We wouldn't we wouldn't spend excuse me, more 4 times more for our military budget than the number 2 country in the world in expenditures. That's the United Kingdom. And, you know, why do we have to be 4 times, why do we have to spend 4 times what number 2 does when it comes to military expenditures? And, you know, there's the way most Americans think about the poor, the way most Americans think about health care, they couldn't possibly understand the radical nature of what Jesus taught. And so, I mean, basically, I'm a preacher with a historian's degree, and that's what I try to do.
I had some other questions. I wanted to double check Justice. I had closed her mic by accident. Justice, if you're listening in, if you had any questions you wanted to ask, please hop right in if you have any questions. Justice, are you there? Your line is open if you have any questions.
Well, we need some justice, so maybe she'll come back.
I hope so. We are in desperate need of justice. If your line opens up, if you hear that, your mic is open. Feel free to hop in if you have questions. Some other folks called in as well. Are you okay taking a few questions?
Sure.
Okay. Believe this is Mr. Nero. Mr. Nero, if you have a question for Dr. Manish, your line is open.
Greetings, Gus. May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
You are being heard.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I missed the first few minutes of the show, so I didn't catch your guest's name.
Dr. Andrew Manis.
Dr. Manis. Well, thank you, sir, for taking the time to come on the cows.
Glad to do so.
I just have a question in regards to a term you've been using and one that bothers me. You referred, I believe, to black people as African Americans. Can you tell me the difference between an African American and an American?
An African American is an American who is descended from Africa. I'm a Greek American. I recently spent a semester teaching in Greece. My parents are Greek. They were born in Greece. I've been Greek all my life. I'm proud to be of Greek descent. I'm also proud to be an American. I don't see a problem. I don't see a problem with understanding that I came from someplace else, or at least my people came from someplace else. And on the other hand, historically, one of the reasons for I don't know who the person I know for sure who emphasized switching the terminology from black to African American was Jesse Jackson. He may not have been the first, but I know he some years ago began that sort of emphasis, and I think that's a good thing to do, because European mentality has talked about Africa as being the dark continent, the continent that never produced any civilizations that were the equal of Greece or Rome, etc. And that's not true. And so this is sort of a way of saying, don't believe the propaganda. There's nothing wrong with Africa. And so, generally speaking, I use African Americans, or the terminology African Americans, but I use it synonymously with blacks, I do understand that there are a number of persons of African descent who don't like that designation for one reason or another, and I try to respect them. But we speak languages that the current vogue in academic life is to use African American now, and since that's where I live and work, that's the terminology I use.
Can a white person that was born in Johannesburg, Africa, and who applies for citizenship in America also be classified as an African American once he's granted citizenship?
Well, it's not a perfect designation, and they're obviously, Did you say a white person from South Africa?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason why I bring it up is because it was a white man from South Africa who told me I should not be calling myself an African American because he spoke fluent Swahili.
Yeah.
He was raised in Johannesburg, and he was now an American citizen, and he felt like the term African American only applied to him.
Well, I can respect that point of view. It's a difficult question to answer because there are lots of I've run into quite a few persons of African descent who are Americans who don't like the designation African American.
And I want to be clear. I'm sorry to cut you off, sir. For me, it's not about like or dislike. It just doesn't seem like a very accurate term.
Well, it's not accurate. It's not totally accurate. It is accurate from one point of view, but it's not totally accurate. But like I said, there are a number. Anything you would use has some advantages and disadvantages. Gus, what do most of your listeners feel about this?
I use the term non-white and victim of white supremacy on the program. I think those two terms are accurate. I know people get upset about the term victim because they say it takes away agency and you're not, sounds like you don't have any pride and you just talk about how you've been beaten up. I hear that sometimes. I hear some people say that they don't like non-white because it's self-negating and it's labeling yourself by what you are not, or labeling yourself in relation to white people. But those are the terms that I use here consistently, and most of my listeners have gotten comfortable with that. And I think most of my listeners have heard various individuals say something pretty similar to what Mr. Nero is saying about how these other labels, they're just not very accurate in terms of trying to describe what makes you a so-called African American. That discussion can get very confusing. I like terms that provide more clarity. I think that's what most of my listeners have expressed, but there have been folks who deviated from that as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure non-white is as clear because there are certainly lots of non-whites who are not. They are deemed inferior to the system that you referred to, but I would argue, for example, that other immigrant groups. Well, I say other. I shouldn't say other because African Americans, blacks, are not immigrant groups, but sometimes they are compared to immigrant groups, and but these other ethnicities have been viewed as inferior to the extent that they are not white, but for example, Greeks or Irish or others have been able to claim whiteness, and therefore have been able to climb the ladder faster to the extent that they could prove that they were that they were white.
Absolutely correct.
Which is a way of saying that the treatment that the sons and daughters of Africa who were brought to America as slaves have been treated quantitatively and qualitatively differently and worse than other groups. There was discrimination, yes, against the Irish. There was discrimination against the Chinese and the Japanese. But the system was built, and it was built gradually during the colonial period, specifically to demean black flesh, black, the descendants of Africa, and it has been systematically demeaning blackness ever since, and also Africanness ever since. And to me that's a good reason for making the distinction. Non-white is accurate. It may not be as precise, because not all whites, not all non-whites have suffered from this system the way the sons and daughters of Africa have. And with more intentionality and more deliberateness than has been true of any other ethnic group that has come to these shores.
I agree 100%. I am a so-called black person. I agree, and I make an effort to point that out on this program consistently, both with evidence and if I get a white person here or a non-white person who is not black, I also get them to make sure that they speak honestly about that fact. I believe that's very important to acknowledge. He asked about African Americans specifically. I just say individuals are classified as black. I think that's a tad more accurate than the label of African American. Because that was the term that he asked about. But yeah, I think that's totally accurate. And I just say people who are classified as black, because I really couldn't. If someone were to ask me about black, I think I have seen that discussion be just as confusing, with people trying to explain what that means, and just saying, hey, at the end of the day, these are labels that the racist white supremacists constructed to maintain their system. They control what these terms mean.
That's right, and the reason why both terms are significant is because the white system has devalued blackness, and therefore the Black Power movement elevated blackness as a way of saying, don't believe the propaganda. Black is beautiful. And the same has been true with regard to Africa. There are any, excuse me, my voice is giving out a bit here. There's any number of African American or black religious figures in American history who have embraced Africa, and Garvey called it Africanity. Henry McNeil Turner from here in Georgia, sort of gave up on the idea of racial justice in America and began to think in terms of immigration to Africa. Henry McNeil Turner would have been a contemporary of Booker T. Washington. They died in the same year, 1915. European the white system has left no stone unturned, so to speak. It has, if you refer to them by the color of their skin, will demean that. If we refer to them from their geographical origins in Africa, will demean that. And so the black freedom struggle has at various times elevated both blackness and Africanness as a way of saying, you know, we're going to counter what white folks have always said about us, whether they said it about black folk or whether they said it about Africans. You know, so when you think about it that way, you know, it's probably accurate to say that there's good reason for calling that group of people black. It's also good reason to call them African Americans. But I understand that, you know, there are different ways of its being imprecise.
Mm-hmm. Somebody called in. They've number showing up as 111. Person that called in 111. You have a hand up. If you have a question for Dr. Andrew Manis, your mic is open.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks for taking my call, Gus. I didn't heard your guests for a while now, and I've heard a lot of guests who came in and talked about the system of racism, white supremacy, and in my opinion, I just want to know if your guest agrees, white people are not going to stop practicing racism, white supremacy. Is part of the reason is because, I think the major reason is because they mistreat what they eat. And it started from, I think, mistreating people, started from mistreating animals. And I think if they don't stop eating meat and slaughtering animals, they're not going to ever stop practicing racism and white supremacy with people, because what they eat is mistreatment. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes, theoretically I would agree with that. I think that's a hard sell. I mean, it's hard enough sell as it is, and you know, so I think it confuses the matter to make that point. Your likelihood of convincing white people to quit eating meat, and white people are not the only people who eat meat, so I think that makes a difficult argument that much more difficult. So I agree with your logic. I just don't think that that's I don't think that that's a strategy that's likely to have much success.
Let's see. Someone else called in at 111, different caller at 111 with a hand up. If you have a question for Dr. Manis, your line is open. Other caller at 111, you have a hand up. Do you have a question? Your line is open. Very interesting. Okay. Let's see. I'll check. Different caller at 111. Other caller at 111. If you have a question for Dr. Manis, your line is open.
Hello, Gus?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, how you doing?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I thought you were talking to me when you opened the line earlier. I was saying hello, but I guess it wasn't me. Mr. Manis? Is it Dr. Manis or?
Yeah, excuse me. Andrew's fine.
Okay, Andrew. You remind me, I don't know if it's because you're from the South, but you remind me of another guest that was on this program, and he was an ex-Klan so-called ex-Klan member.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's because you're from the South or because you guys pretty much say similar things. I've noticed so-called white, so-called Christians, they don't have a problem. When they talk about Jesus, they're usually talking about this white man that's being propagated everywhere. That's all over literature and churches and whatnot. Have you ever wrote anything about that, or have you ever challenged any churches or anything that had that image? And how do you feel about that image?
Well, I think Jesus was non-white. But the problem. I'm sorry, my voice is. I'm having more trouble here as we go along. When you talk about Jesus, you have to make a distinction as to whether you're talking about Jesus, the man who lived in Nazareth, and that man was a Jew. That man grew up in, Israel. That man was probably not as light-skinned as most American white people are. But a lot of people sort of, when they think of Jesus, they think of not so much Jesus, the historical person, but they think of him sort of after the resurrection as a divine figure. So the theologians or the biblical scholars make the distinction between the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith. And so when sometimes when groups of people depict Jesus, they depict Jesus with characteristics that look like them. And so that, because in their theology they equate Jesus with God, and therefore you can see pictures of Jesus who sometimes look Asian, with Asian Christians, and so there is a sense that that there's a distinction there. But what I would say to people is, if Jesus were to walk into most white churches, the people would think that some non-white person had just come into their church, and so not accepting persons of color is problematic, because of course Jesus was a person of color, and he said, if you have rejected, if you've welcomed them, you've welcomed me. So I don't know, I think maybe the cough medicine that I've been taking has begun to get to my head here, and I may not be making any sense anymore. But the point is, Jesus was not white, and I think, well, I don't want to go out on a limb because I don't know this to be true, but I would think most white Christians recognize that Jesus was not as light complected as most Americans are, but I don't know that for a fact.
That's interesting. I don't know. Somebody else had called in. I was going to get that, but I want to check. Did you want to get some water or take a break really quick before we get that last call?
Let's see. I'm good for a few more minutes, I think.
Oh, okay. I'll double check and see.
I got a little drink here. A little Dr. Pepper. I'm medicating myself with Dr. Pepper.
Right on. Yeah, I'll double check and see if gentlemen, I believe, got disconnected, but call back. The other caller at 111, did you have a question for Dr. Manis? Tried to get you on before.
Hello?
Okay, I can hear you.
Hello?
Were you already able to ask your question, or is this the person who was not able to get through?
No, I had a follow-up. Hello?
Oh, okay. Yes, we can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up to my question, but is it okay for me to go?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Well, he said he didn't believe it was going to be convincing to people about changing their eating habits, but yet he keeps referring the Bible. And in the Bible, I'm not a religious person, but I use logic. And in the Bible, I guess in Genesis, basically says that the herbs are for the healing of the nation. And that's actually how people are going to heal themselves, is through eating, the green leaves. And for us to actually heal this problem, they have to change not just treating people bad, but treating everything on the planet, mistreating everything. And if they can't stop with the Bible, how I expect them to ever stop receiving a privilege that doesn't have any logic to it? So if you're going to keep eating cheeseburgers, you're going to keep treating me like a second-class citizen. So I'm just following logic. If you don't think people are going to change that way, then we're just wasting our time, in my opinion.
Well, we'll just have to disagree on that, because I think you're wasting your time if you think that going into the diet is going to convince people to get rid of racism. It's like I said a while ago, it's a hard enough argument. Now, I will say that the Bible does call upon believers to be good stewards of the earth, and white people have not been very good stewards of the earth in terms of taking care of the environment. And to the extent that it includes eating meat, then clearly that's one way of taking care of part of the environment, and we certainly have a lot before us in terms of taking care of the environment in a way that is most helpful for the largest number of human beings. And clearly we probably we would we would be better off in our little global village if we quit eating meat in lots of ways. But as an entree to the issue of racism, it's just going to make the argument about racism that much more difficult to convince persons of, and I think my time would be better spent dealing with the areas that are easy to see than it is to deal with things that may be logically connected to it, but will seem fairly distant to most people. It's a matter of strategy. I think your your logic is good in terms of a strategy for effective social change. I doubt seriously that that's going to, that's going to go very far. This would be something that Gandhi and Dr. King would disagree about, I think, because, Dr. King still liked to eat steak, and he ate steak probably on the night before he was assassinated. And of course, Gandhi was a vegetarian and believed in that belief, ahimsa, which is a part of Hinduism, that is respect for all human life. But Dr. King didn't go there. Just because he didn't go there doesn't mean we shouldn't. I just don't think it's an argument that's likely to help convince people to reform themselves on the issue of racism.
Thank you for the responses to the callers, Dr. Manis. I guess before the voice conks out and you have to leave us, I did want to ask, I was able to also read, you mailed me, I guess, a speech that you gave earlier this year, Post-Racial America, Are You Kidding Me? Mm-hmm. And you talked about some of the, I guess, statistics that show, I'm putting this in quotes, the progress we're making against racism, white supremacy, and two of the things that you cited were school segregation, that white people appear more accepting of school segregation, and interracial.
Philosophically, they're not accepting of it in real life because we have such tragic amounts of residential segregation and white flight. So, it's one thing to believe it in one's head. It's another thing to embody it, and we don't do a very good job of the latter.
Yeah, that's what I was very curious about, because the at least statistics that I've seen, the school segregation is getting worse. It's not getting better. It kind of goes back to what I said. It's white people can do a very good job of saying all the correct things so that nobody sounds racist, but
that's right.
You still have just oodles and boodles of evidence that racism, white supremacy is being practiced, even though no one is making any overtly racist comments. I guess the interracial relationships one, I don't know, is that something that's philosophical too, you think, or?
Say again?
You also cited changing attitudes about interracial relationships, and I was just curious if you think that's something that's just philosophical, that white people just say that so that they don't sound racist, or?
Well, I'm looking around, and I see polls that indicate that decreasing numbers of Americans say they disapprove of interracial relationships. That certainly wasn't the case when I was a boy in the 60s. And I've seen, several polls that suggest that. In addition to that, as I walk around in the world, I see black women with white men and white women with black men a good deal more often than I did when I was a kid. And that's just my observation. And that's also in central Georgia. So it's impressionistic, but it appears to me that decreasing numbers of Americans, both black and white, object to interracial, say interracial marriage or interracial dating, that sort of thing, then was the case 40 years ago. You know, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I obviously thought it was think it's a good thing. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing for in this society for black people or whites to date or marry across racial lines because of the difficulties that still are there. But I think the difficulties are less than used to be the case. And I think that's at least one way of measuring some, some progress. I also think there's more significant progress in that, it makes a difference that the law does not bless, does not approve of segregation. As was the case during Jim Crow, when the actual law says this. Because if something is law, then it sometimes is viewed as, law handed down from God or something, or it has an authority when it is law, and that it doesn't have if it's not supported by law. And I think that makes a difference. Dr. King thought it made a difference. He said the law couldn't make anybody love anybody, but it could keep somebody from killing someone. And so, since segregation is no longer supported by law, at least at the at the conscious level, there are inconsistencies, of course, in laws that allow that allow racism to have free reign. But some of it's law, some of it's custom, some of it's both. We talk about the right of private property, or somebody has the right to not sell a house to a black family if they don't want to sell it to a black family. And so we have a custom in America where property rights trump civil rights or human rights. I think there has been progress. If you can, when I hear students sometimes say there's not much difference than used to be the case, I have to say, well, when was the last time you tried to drive across Georgia and didn't have a place to go to the bathroom? That is an experience that your grandparents had that you don't have now. That may not be the most important thing in the world, but it is a sign of some progress. And we do have a black man in the White House, which is certainly no panacea or cure-all, but it is something that was unthinkable, and it's hard to find very many people who would have predicted it, say, 10 years ago. And to be and for the first black president to be a Democrat to boot is even more surprising. For several years, the past 10 or 15 years, I had always predicted that the first black or the first woman to be elected president would more than likely be a Republican. Why did you
think the first black president would be a Republican?
because because generally America is so conservative that the only way they could, I thought, before Obama, that the only way enough Americans, white Americans, could see themselves voting for a black man for president was if that president or if that black candidate was very conservative. That being black was enough of sort of put voters off balance, and that they might vote for a black person if a black person thought like a white person, which is what I think, for example, black Republicans tend to do. That is, they buy into the Republican, or it's not just Republican, because the Democrats did this in earlier generations. It's really conservatives, and conservatives are going to do what conservatives do, and that is to conserve a status quo, and the status quo is built to advantage white people and disadvantage black people and other persons of color.
Have you seen evidence of President Obama having to do that now, even as a so-called Democrat, having to, you said, think like a white person, do the status?
He didn't talk about he didn't talk about race very much in the campaign, except when he absolutely had to. If it hadn't been for Reverend Wright and all of that stuff, he might not have talked about race very much at all in the campaign. Well, with a black candidate for president has to avoid speaking about race, it's a sign that at the very least you've not reached a post-racial America. When in order to win, if he had talked about race very much more in the campaign, he would have run the risk of looking like an angry black man. And if he looked like an angry black man, and the choice was between an angry black man and an angry white man named John McCain, Americans would have voted for McCain. And so it's, to me, is there is an extent to which he had to downplay the race issue in order to seem post-racial. And I think the fact that he did that or felt he had to do that was a sign that we were not post-racial in an ironic way. He doesn't want to talk about, he doesn't want to specifically talk about very much about black issues. He would be extremely reluctant to deal with the issue of an apology for slavery and or reparations, I suspect he'll stay away from those issues, hopefully for 8 years. I don't mean hopefully that he'll stay away from them. I think he will. I hope he gets 8 years of the opportunity to deal with it or avoid it, but just because, that would be 8 years of his being in the White House, which I think ultimately will be a good thing.
We'll see what the Tea Party members have to say about that.
Well, we know what they're going to say about it. We know what they're going to say about it, and let them say it. That the only thing that I don't want them to say, or the only thing I do want them to say is to call out the members of their ilk who make the racial comments, or who have the racist placards or whatever. I think that they need to. I think that they need to cool their rhetoric, because I have seen, as a historian, when politicians use volatile language, it can have some very negative effects. When civic leaders use volatile language the way they do, there are plenty of followers that those leaders have who can easily become unhinged and do things of a violent nature because the rhetoric has been so overheated. There's an example of that from the state of Georgia. In 1906, there was a gubernatorial election or race, and the two candidates, of course, two white men, were one of them had become convinced that disfranchisement was necessary, disfranchising black voters. The other candidate was against disfranchising black voters. But in the process of arguing over this during an entire gubernatorial campaign, it became one of the most racially charged political campaigns in American history in terms of the kind of rhetoric that was used to describe black people, and and they just, both candidates just went out of their way to out racist the other, and a few weeks after the election was over, they had created such an environment that just a few weeks after that there was an instance in Atlanta, and it led to the Atlanta race riots of 1906. So there's very powerful evidence that this kind of rhetoric is dangerous because of what it seems to put its stamp of approval on, and in the part of the electorate that tends to become unhinged can become unhinged when they hear people saying, like Rush Limbaugh, we need to stop the bastards, this sort of thing. It's very dangerous, and I would hope that these Tea Party types, let them say what they want to say. They're gonna say what they want to say anyway. But if they're going to claim to be colorblind, which I know they're not, but if they are going to claim it, then at least it would be nice if they would denounce people within their own circle who are becoming obvious in their racist language.
That looking at some of your work and the essays in particular, a lot of the images that I've seen of so-called Tea Party protesters, if you rewind 40 years, listeners, and look at some of the photos from the Civil Rights Movement and the white people that were outside complaining about busing and the sit-ins, it looks eerily similar. If you look at some of those photos.
That's a very good point. I had not thought about that, but you're right. You're absolutely right about that.
You just change some of the signs and.
yeah. The language is the language sounds similar, and the images sound similar.
Frightening. That's our progress. Thank you for hanging in. I know you are not feeling your best. Thank you for hanging in for the duration of the program and chatting with us. I appreciate it. Constructive information. Are you publishing anything or working on anything coming down the road soon?
I've got some things in the hopper, but they're not likely to come out soon. We've just started Macon State used to be a junior college up until about 10 years ago, and recently we started four-year program in history, and so for the last 2 years and for probably the next 2 years, most of my time is being spent generating new courses for upper-level history students. And when that happens, not much writing gets done, so it may be a while before something of mine comes out again, other than, occasional pieces like the op-ed that got me on your program.
I see. Well, I will definitely be looking out for future essays, what have you. Again, I appreciate you spending some of your Tuesday evening with us, and I hope you will recuperate quickly, continue the counter-racist effort. If you have anything you'd like to share before you go, please feel free.
Well, I don't, but I'm happy to have endured the 2 hours with only a little bit of difficulty with my voice, and thank you to your callers, and I appreciate the invitation to be with you.
Thank you. I will definitely, as I said, be looking out for future work, and wish you the best down there in Georgia, sir.
Great. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Context of white supremacy, justice, and Gus T Renegade. I'm going to take a quick commercial break if I am able, switchboard permitting, and we'll be right back. Alrighty, that's very interesting. Switchboard is not doing what it's supposed to do. Very interesting. Alrighty then. I guess I will not be taking a commercial break. The switchboard is not working, and it's not even the end of the program. The switchboard is not cooperating. Life is hard. At any rate, check out the program with Jacqueline Battlora. Very constructive. She was on the broadcast earlier today, Tuesday, May 4th, 2010. Very constructive information, I suspect. Could be wrong, but I think it was helpful. She really did an excellent job, I think, of explaining why white equals racist, white supremacist. Highly recommend that program. We will be back on Saturday, May 8th. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, he'll be making his second visit to the cows. He was on the program 1 year ago.
Is racism hurting you?
Oh, I thought the commercial was going to play, and it didn't even go. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, he'll be here on Saturday, and it will be at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 noon Pacific. We'll be talking about Nixon's piano. As I said, Dr. O'Reilly, he was here in April of 2009. We talked about his book, Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972. Very constructive book. Lots of information about how white people at the Federal Bureau of Investigations practiced racism, white supremacy, harmed a lot of black people who were attempting to counter racism. Very informative book. One of his other books, Nixon's Piano, it talks about how every president from Washington to Bill Clinton, that was the time his book was published, has practiced racism, white supremacy in some way, shape, or form. And that book just